Praise the Lord, everybody. We're not going through the procedure that we usually use, welcoming everybody, but I wish you would turn around and tell somebody, thank you for coming. You know, people don't have to come to church. We're happy to see everybody here. We are so grateful to have the mayor of New York, one of the greatest mayors over the greatest state we know of. We're happy to have him come and be with him and his staff. We want to thank God for the candidate. All of you all. So without further ado, the mayor is here, and I have learned in the 40 years of trying to be a good custodian, city pastor, long as you have people sitting, that worship is on them. So I'm not going to go into the mayor's lifestyle. I remember Johnny Carson in his life term here. Johnny always had someone to introduce him, and they said this: ladies and gentlemen, our speaker for the evening, Johnny Carson. Ladies and gentlemen, the mayor of New York. Thank you, Mr. Lyons, and good morning.
Good morning.
I've never been introduced by Johnny Carson before, and that's as close as I'll ever come. It is a pleasure to be here with you, and I want to thank Bishop Lyons for inviting me. He has been a great leader in this community, and I can only hope that his vim and vigor at age 90 continues. Of course, Bishop, I don't know how to break this to you, but my mother lived to 102, so in my book, you're still a spring chicken. Bishop Lyons has been a great partner with our administration. He and other ministers have joined with our police department to form a police clergy coalition that really has been a big success. And together they came up with a 10-point action plan to help stop crime, including gun buybacks and gang interventions. And I just wanted to thank him because in part of that, thanks to part of that work, last year we did set a record in Brooklyn for the lowest number of murders since 1963. That's what I want to talk about today. It's not a nice subject, but I think it is the most important subject for us to talk about. In 1963, as a few of us are old enough to remember, that was the year that Dr. King inspired the nation with a speech declaring he had a dream of a better, more just America. Only 5 years later, sadly, a bullet took his life and guns began taking over our streets. And today, the horror of gun violence is still with us, but so is the hope of a better, more just America. And that's really what I want to talk about. On this beautiful morning, I'd like to talk a little bit about the horror we still face on our streets and the hope that we still have in our hearts. Hope has brought us here today to celebrate God and the life that God gave us. It is a precious gift, one that we sometimes take for granted. We go about our day, we have our routines, but then in the blink of an eye, something can happen. Tragedy can occur, maybe to someone we love, or somebody at work, or a neighbor, and it makes us realize, there but for the grace of God go I. Now, many of the tragedies involve violence, and the sad reality is that most of the violence in our city happens in communities just like this one where we are today. Across this city, 90% of all murder victims are Black and Hispanic. 90%. And this year, we are on track to record the lowest number of murders in our city's history. But even though we are safer than ever, in just the first week of June, which was a fairly typical week in New York City, we still had 10 murders. To their families and loved ones, their mothers and fathers, their friends and neighbors, these 10 people were not a statistic. They were human beings. Just listen. Jimmy Albright, age 32, Sheepshead Bay. Calvez Punto, age 17, East New York. Akeem Green, age 25, Harlem. Abdul Garcia, age 24, Hunts Point. Jose Herrera, age 29, Brighton Beach. Anthony Martino, age 23, Wakefield. James Brown, age 24, East New York. Eberto Suazo, age 26, Harlem. Luis Catalan, age 25, Harlem. Amari Rodriguez, age 30, Harlem. All 10 victims were young men. All 10 victims were Black or Hispanic. And in all likelihood, there will be more murders this coming week, and most of them will again be Black and Hispanic. Now, I do not accept that the idea that Black and Hispanic communities will invariably suffer higher rates of violence than other parts of the city. And with every ounce of my being, I believe that our city has a responsibility to save lives and drive down crime in every community in our city. And I believe just as strongly that our police department has a responsibility to treat people in every community with the respect that they deserve. And bringing those two things together is the subject here. It wasn't long ago that many people didn't think that we could do both of those things. In the 1990s, we saw a dramatic reduction in crime, but at the very same time, racial tensions were high. And the truth is, they had been high for decades. When I came into office 10 years ago, many people thought that the only way to keep crime low was to accept the bad blood that came with it. Let me be clear. I refuse to accept that idea as well. I believe then and I believe now that we could drive crime down even lower, while at the same time improving police-community relations. And Ray Kelly, sitting right in the front row here, believed that too. And that's why I hired him as our police commissioner. And it's why Mayor David Dinkins made him commissioner before me. Now, from our first days in office, Ray and I had two goals for the NYPD. Make our streets safer and move to beyond the old racial valleys. We were determined to build on the sense of unity we felt in the wake of the 9/11 attacks, when divisions of race ceased to matter. And over the past 10 years, I've worked hard to move our city forward in a united way, and so has Commissioner Kelly. He's built new bridges to the Black and Latino communities, like the Police Clergy Coalition, and he's done an outstanding job diversifying the NYPD. In fact, today, a majority of those with the rank of police officer or higher are minorities, and that's as it should be. The most diverse city in the world deserves the most diverse police department, and we built it. And the diversity of our police department is a major strength, and is a major reason why we've been able to improve community relations while also driving crime to record lows. Today, New York is the safest big city in America by far. Boston and Chicago. Boston, where I grew up, Chicago, have a lot of friends. Nice towns. But you are about twice as likely to be murdered there as you are in New York City. You are 3 times more likely to be murdered in Philadelphia or Washington, D.C. as you are in New York City. You are 5 times more likely to be murdered in Baltimore, 8 times more likely to be murdered in Detroit, and 9 times more likely to be murdered in New Orleans. It hasn't always been that way. In fact, if you remember, the reverse used to be true. As I'm sure some of you can remember, it wasn't that long ago when New York City was the crime capital of the United States. Nearly everywhere you went back then, there was a sense of danger, and it had a devastating effect on our communities and on our economy. Businesses shut down and boarded up. Families pulled up stakes and moved to the suburbs. People avoided the subways at night. More than 2,000 people were murdered each year, many of them only children, and most of them from communities like Central Brooklyn, Harlem, the South Bronx, and Southeast Queens. That all began to change when Mayor Dinkins signed a new law adding 5,000 more police officers to the street, and when he hired Ray Kelly as police commissioner back in 1992. The Giuliani administration accelerated the crime reduction, driving it down to new lows. And over the past 10 years, we've cut crime 34% below what it was when we took office back in 2002. Let me tell you what 34% really means. It means that if total crime from the last decade, when this administration has been in office, had been the same as the decade before, there would have been an additional 5,600 people murdered over those 10 years. And more than 1 million additional people would have been victims of rape, robbery, violent assault, or car theft. And we all know that the vast majority of those victims would have been Black and Hispanic, including, in all likelihood, many residents of this community. Thank God they were saved, and they weren't the only ones. We've also cut crime. We've cut the number of people who end up behind bars at the same time. In fact, compared to a decade ago, and listen to this carefully because nobody understands what we've really done, there have been 30% fewer people behind bars than there were 10 years ago. That means 216,000 fewer incarcerations over the past decade than there otherwise would have been. That's 216,000 times that people stayed out of jails and in their communities. And if they'd been in jail, we all know what corrections really means in a practical sense. Some of these kids learn how to be criminals, real criminals, hard criminals. Keeping them with their families, we have a chance to turn their lives around. And as we've cut the number of people behind bars by 30%, let me tell you what's happened in the rest of the nation. The number has actually gone up by 6%. So not only has New York City had a steeper decline in crime than the rest of America, but we did it while decreasing incarceration, unlike in the rest of the country, where it is increasing. If we hadn't been locking up more people, then how could we be keeping more young men away from a life of crime, we want to know? Well, I believe it all starts with education, and our school's Chancellor, Dennis Walcott, is here today. And we've made huge improvements in our schools over the past decade. Graduation rates have increased by 40%, and helping kids earn a high school diploma is one of the best ways that we know to keep them out of trouble and on track for a career. We've also worked hard to help juvenile offenders, kids who've already made a mistake, get back on track. This year, we worked with Governor Cuomo to pass a bill in Albany that will allow more juvenile offenders to stay in their communities instead of being sent to failing facilities upstate. When they're upstate, they're disconnected from their families, their schools, and their community leaders who could have helped them. And that's why we're bringing more of them back to home. We've also launched the nation's first comprehensive effort called the Young Men's Initiative to help Black and Latino youth overcome the odds and succeed. George Soros, a great philanthropist, gave $30 million. Bloomberg Philanthropies gave another $30 million, and the city is adding another $67 million. And that $127 million is money we're using to begin programs like the new Brownsville Community Justice Center, which is connecting troubled teens to school, work, and mentors. And if you need any proof that mentors can make an enormous difference in a child's life, just consider the positive influence of a community leader many of you, I'm sure, knew, Greg Jackson. Amen. Greg Jackson helped a generation of children to see their God-given potential, and his death 3 months ago was a tragic loss for Brownsville and our Parks Department and for the entire city. But we're determined to continue to carry on his work here and across all 5 boroughs. Our goal is to connect more young men to school and work. Because the fact is, even though skin color in America no longer determines a child's fate, sadly, it does tell us far more about a child's future than it should. Young Black and Latino men are twice as likely as white children to drop out of school and twice as likely to end up out of work. How can we possibly sit back and accept that? We can't, and I'm telling you, we won't. We've taken action. taken action over the past decade to begin those disparities, and we are determined to do even more. The worst, most tragic disparity is that young black men are 36 times more likely to be murdered, and young Hispanic men are 12 more times likely to be murdered than young white men. And sadly, they are also far more likely to commit murder. I mentioned earlier that 90% of all people murdered in our city are black and Hispanic. It's also true that 96% of shooting suspects are black and Hispanic. And I don't have to tell you in this community about the tragedy of black-on-black crime. And I don't have to tell you that most of the shooters and victims are young men. Over the past few months, I've talked with ministers who work closely with young men every day, and with young men themselves. And one of the things that we've talked about is whether they've had interactions with the police, and that's the other thing I want to talk about, and whether they've been stopped, questioned, and frisked. Many of the young people have, and some have said that they understood why. At the same time, many of them have said that their interactions with officers left them angry, either because of disrespectful language or unnecessary force. I can tell you, I would be angry as well. And so I understand why some people have called for stops to be eliminated entirely. But there's no denying that stops take guns off the street and save lives. And to borrow a phrase from President Clinton, I believe the practice needs to be mended, not ended, to ensure that stops are conducted appropriately with as much courtesy as possible. Now, the average police officer makes one stop every 10 days and conducts a frisk once every 19 days. Last year, those frisks produced 780 guns, 5,827 knives, and 1,572 other dangerous weapons. Just as importantly, it quite unquestionably deterred many from carrying those weapons in the first place. By making it too hot to carry, the NYPD is preventing guns from being carried on our streets. And that is our real goal, preventing violence before it occurs, not responding to victims after the fact. Now, there are some who would say we are stopping too many black and Hispanic young men. Let me say clearly, racial profiling is wrong, and we will not tolerate it. I don't think either Ray Kelly or I need to have our credentials in trying to stop racial disparity and discrimination question. We both have spent our lives working on it. But it is also true that we will not tolerate racial profiling, but we have to go and see where the crime is. And that's why Kelly has reissued an order banning racial profiling, and it is being reinforced in NYPD training. No person should ever be stopped because of his or her race. Stops should be based solely on suspicion of criminal activity, and nothing short of that will be tolerated. So, yes. Someone might say it's unfair that men are stopped more often than women, and that young people are stopped more often than old people. I hope, and you should hope, that we all live to see the day when men commit as few crimes as women, and the young commit as few crimes as the old do. But until that day arrives, we are not going to deny reality. In order to prevent crime, police officers have to be able to make stops based on crime reports, not census reports. If we stop criminals, as we stop people based on census numbers, we would stop many fewer criminals, recover many fewer weapons, and allow many more violent crimes to take place. And we will not do that. We will not bury our heads in the sand. We can never forget who is being killed, and we can't deny what neighborhoods they're being killed in. The reason police officers make stops in Brownsville and East New York is not because of race, it is because of crime. Brownsville and East New York remain two of the highest crime areas in our city. And while we have cut crime here over the past 10 years, we certainly have not cut it by enough. And we're not going to walk away from a strategy that we know saves lives. At the same time, we owe it to New Yorkers to ensure that stops are properly conducted and carried out in a respectful way. Commissioner Kelly and I believe that we can do a better job in both areas. I think there's no doubt that the NYPD is the best trained police department in the world, but we can always do better. And when it comes to stops, we must and we will. And that's one reason why last year, Commissioner Kelly issued an order to clarify that when officers find someone carrying a small amount of marijuana, rather than making an arrest, a summons should be issued, just as if marijuana was found in the home. Since then, arrests have dropped by a quarter, arrests for marijuana. Last week, Commissioner Kelly and I joined Governor Cuomo in supporting an amendment to state law that would effectively codify the directive that Commissioner Kelly put in place months ago. But no matter what happens in Albany, we are already reducing the number of arrests for marijuana and keeping more young people from having negative interactions with the criminal justice system. In addition, Commissioner Kelly recently announced a number of steps that will help improve how stops are conducted. First, we have established a new training course and created new training videos to reinforce the proper protocols for stops and the responsibilities that officers have when they make one. Second, the executive officer in each precinct will now be responsible for personally conducting an audit of the stop, question, and frisk data to ensure that our protocols are being followed and to identify any issues. Third, the NYPD has integrated data on stops into their weekly meetings so that high-level NYPD officers can hold precincts accountable for making sure that stops are properly conducted and performed with dignity. Throughout all these steps, we'll be putting a new emphasis on courtesy, respect, and professionalism, so that when innocent people are stopped and questioned, the interaction does not leave them hurt. In addition, because of the success of the Police Clergy Coalition here in Brownsville, and thanks to people like Bishop Lyons, Bishop Seabrooks, and Bishop Billups, Commissioner Kelly will soon be expanding it to other communities around the city. Forming partnerships with more pastors will not only help the NYPD fight crime, it will help the NYPD keep its finger on the pulse of the community so that problems that might otherwise fester can be fixed. New Yorkers in every community deserve to be treated with respect, and New Yorkers in every community deserve to be safe. And there's no doubt that we've come a long way in both areas over the past 10 years, but we can always do more, and you have my commitment, we will. That is my pledge. I firmly believe that we can drive crime down even further, and we can do it while bringing our city even closer together. And as long as I am mayor, we will not choose between safety and civility. We will demand both, and we will continue to do even more to deliver both to every community in our city. Every child is equal, and every life is precious, and I will do all I can while I'm mayor to see that we protect each of them from harm. Thank you, and may God bless you.